Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the owner and founder of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and this is a channel where we provide free personal development tips and tools for your subconscious mind. So I want to talk a little bit about the fearful avoidant and their emotional outbursts, because I think it would be fair to say that this is the attachment style that you will most often see going through sort of an emotional roller coaster. Not to say that this isn't the case for lots of other attachment styles, but specifically for fearful avoidance, usually the intensity behind the emotional outburst can be, a little bit stronger than the others. So why is this? Well, first and foremost, it's important to understand the dynamic of like how the fearful avoidance sort of comes about. And one of the key features is that the caregiver relationships are really one-sided. So oftentimes, the fearful avoidants would only really get emotional presence from their caregiver when, like, let's say they were a baby and mom and dad get into a fight and mom needs comforting, so she goes in and picks up the young child and cries to that child and holds the child and sort of uses the child as like a tool for comforting. Or fearful avoidance can often be attachment styles that come from a lot of physical, sexual, mental, emotional abuse, and they often got their needs met through almost violating their own boundaries to a degree. Like they almost would let some of these things happen or keep showing up in these situations because it was only through violating their own boundaries that they actually got some form of presence or connection from their caregivers. And, that statement holds a lot of weight if you're a fearful avoidant. Like you really want to consider, where was I doing this to myself? And not blaming yourself by any means whatsoever. Like that was a survival strategy because you're wired for attachment. But notice that the weight of that statement means that whenever you feel like you're repeating that pattern again, there will be so much emotional pain often attached to that. Okay. So for example, let's say you were a young child and your parents would always fight, and then you'd go check on your mom, and then you'd go check on your dad. And let's say that you were really there for them. And it was only through doing that they would actually seemingly, be present with you and talk to you and share with you. But nobody ever asked if you were okay. So you kept needing to be, validated or connected to as what you were feeling, what you were experiencing, what your needs were. But instead, the best you could get was being there for others. And so you would keep doing that and essentially violating to a degree your own boundaries, meaning that sort of like two-way exchange in a relationship, because you would get the crumbs, or those crumbs felt like something and they were important to you when you would go and you would connect to mom and dad and be there for them. So that would be a good example of that. And so you want to sort of tune in, where do I have some of that pattern? And that comes from total innocence. It comes from not knowing. It comes from, any times we were hurting ourselves in childhood, it's because there was always a hidden positive intention. It was like, we'd rather that than total emotional neglect or dismissal, or we'd rather that than no comfort after the fights, because we don't even talk to anybody about anything. At least we know what's going on when we talk to mom and dad, or, whatever the context of the situation is. But why that's such an important part of understanding this attachment style is that we tend to repeat this pattern more or less in our adult lives without recognizing. And I want to get into why. So the key point, number one, is that your caregiver relationships are often one-sided. So you are showing up and you are giving, but it's at the expense of yourself. It's at the expense of some other need that you also deeply and intensely have. And this often leaves you to feel really rejected, really unsupported. Often we make a deep subconscious self-interpretation that we are unloved, unseen, unimportant, unheard, like you don't matter, and like you were violated. And so if you take all of these core wounds and then you imagine that you carry so many different core wounds into your adult relationships, when one of these gets activated, if one of them gets touched with like a 10-foot pole, it is chaos. Like it sort of touches on everything, and it reinforces everything you believe about relationships, which is usually that they're painful and that they hurt you and that you can't trust people to not do these things to you and make you feel this way. And all of this emotion is so intense because you would have felt it so many times in so many different situations to different degrees, that it's like you broil, and then you project all of that stored emotion, gets triggered up, and it gets projected onto whatever the current situation is that you're going through. And it's really tough, not just for this attachment style, but for partners of this attachment style, because one day you'll get like the most amazing, loving, caring, responsive, just like wonderful human being. And then, 3 days later, you'll get a monster sometimes. And the person may not understand why, the actual fearful avoidant themselves, or the partner who is going through this and experiencing being on the other side of this. And the fearful avoidant also, like, because of this, because of the emotional ferocity sometimes that comes all up when they've got all these wounds activated, or even just their intensity of how quickly they can withdraw, it does damage to the partner in relationships. That emotional volatility is a huge thing, is one of the top reasons, let's say, for why relationships end eventually. And what that does then is it takes the fearful avoidant individual and it just reinforces all of their core wounds that, look, I am unloved, I am rejected, I don't matter, I violated myself for this person, they couldn't give me anything back. And so we get into this cycle, and what we really want to do is be aware of these core patterns and understand what's happening when we're experiencing all that emotion, that it's not just about the situation right now, but in fact, it's all of the stuff that we haven't properly and completely resolved that's being brought to the surface and the forefront. And it's time, these are symbols or signals that are letting us know that we have things that are deeply buried that we need to work through. And, we want to try really hard to express our feelings and needs to our partner, but not take out our pain on them from the past just because we're being really deeply re-traumatized in a sense. So, the fearful avoidant found often that they would be really positively supported, only essentially when their own boundaries were violated. Like, they would get that presence when they were giving, whatever they could of themselves to somebody else. And this is why relationships are often so painful for you as the fearful avoidant, because you're like, okay, I really crave and desire for connection, for that bond, for relationships. I hunger for it, but I have to always give something to get it. I have to always sacrifice something. I always have to give a part of myself. And what we don't realize, which is so important, is that our relationship to ourselves counts. And that we keep carrying out the same programming that was bestowed upon us in different forms. And this is part of what re-traumatizes us. So let's give an example of this. Let's say mom and dad, to use that same initial example, would fight, and you would care for their feelings and make sure they were okay, or maybe you had an alcoholic parent, and you had to sort of clean up after them and take care of them and make sure they ate food, or whatever it might be. And so let's just say, for the example of fighting, so you would feel so unseen and unheard, and like your feelings didn't matter and that you weren't important, and you would sort of violate what you needed to just go be there for them and get something in return. And here's what happens. You will, in your adult life, keep repeating the same patterns. You will keep, the moment you're around other people, you will keep not hearing, not seeing yourself, keep violating yourself, keep not loving yourself, putting your feelings second. You are actually taking all those core wounds that we talked about, rejected. You reject yourself in favor of other people's needs in relationships. Unsupported. You stop supporting yourself, you support the other person with all of your might, and then you come second, if at all. Unloved, you make yourself feel unloved because you almost like disconnect from yourself and you're so connected to somebody else, but you leave yourself behind. You stop seeing and hearing your own feelings. You don't make yourself matter, and you violate yourself for others' needs. And it is one thing to be giving in a relationship, to be a giving person, but any healthy relationship calls for an exchange of energy. And if there's an imbalance, which there will be from time to time, that's completely normal. This needs to be expressed in a healthy manner from a vulnerable standpoint. You deserve to express what your feelings and your needs are. And oftentimes this is almost like an unknown territory for the fearful avoidant, because they were so used to being there for others that it wasn't something that really came naturally to them or was really that available to them. And so you will keep re-traumatizing yourself the moment you go back into a relationship. And, more or less, one of the greatest sources of trauma for a fearful avoidant is a relationship itself. And so when you enter into one, you're going to be going through a lot of challenges. A lot of things are going to come up. And the beautiful part of this is that it's coming up as an opportunity to see these things, to understand them, and to heal them. And so this isn't something that is just unnecessary pain. This is actually your subconscious emotionally stored experiences making themselves conscious to a degree, so that you can stop repeating the same patterns, so that you can start working on going through these core wounds and neutralizing them, reprogramming them, releasing them, and then having healthier relationships. And relationships are here to guide you towards that as the fearful avoidant. So we want to make sure that we are not reinforcing the same wounds that were given to us through how we treat ourselves the moment we enter into a relationship with others. Okay? Such a key point. We want to make sure, I'm going to repeat it, that we don't re-traumatize ourselves by reinforcing the same core wounds that were given to us the moment we entered into a relationship with others. Okay? Super important to remember. And keep in mind too, like, what love is not your attachment style being activated. Love is like secure and consistent and supportive and vulnerable and kind, and it's not the roller coaster. And sometimes we'll think that it is, because those were our earliest subconscious associations for what love was the drama, the chaos, the emotionality, the intensity. And sometimes we almost think as the fearful avoidant that if we're not experiencing that, we must not be loving. And in fact, that's not the case. Those early associations for what love was sort of conditional love to a degree. It was one-way love. And it didn't mean that your caregivers didn't love you. It means that they weren't capable of loving you in the way that you needed. And of course, you were too young to be capable of clearly and truly expressing what you needed. And so it's time to heal and change those patterns now. And so the last thing that I really want to highlight here is the key components is we want to learn how to settle into relationships, get out of that roller coaster, and learn to know what love is without our attachment style being activated, and to really get into that secure attachment style pattern. And we want to learn how to set boundaries. We want to learn how to be vulnerable. We want to learn how to self-care, and we want to learn how to be grounded in ourselves and rooted in ourselves despite being in a relationship. It's one thing to be giving. It's another thing to be giving at the expense of yourself. Relationships are not about self-sacrifice. Relationships are about compromise, which means both parties clearly and explicitly defining their needs, expressing their needs, sharing their needs from a vulnerable space, and both parties coming up with strategies to create balance between both parties' needs being met, and to understand each other's unique perspectives and wounds, and to have those conversations. And that's what giving is giving from a place that gives to both people, because it feels good to give when it's not at the expense of violating ourselves in some way or over giving so much. And then the moment somebody doesn't do something small in return, instead of, letting the person know that hurt us or upset us and, what we needed, we freak out and blow up because it seems to reinforce all of the pain that we are still subconsciously storing. So, this is part of why the fearful avoidant goes through so many emotional outbursts. This is such an important topic because there's so much stuff here that's waiting to be discovered if this is your attachment style. And I'll make a video about how to deal with the fearful avoidance emotional outburst if you're on the other side. But I really wanted to be clear on this for the fearful avoidant first and foremost. So thank you so much for watching. Keep in mind, I work with people individually to help them move through these core issues. I spend a lot of time talking to people and helping them work through their attachment style and actually changing their attachment style. But I also have an amazing team of people that I've trained and hired and that do the same sort of work. And so please reach out. Like, if you have questions, please reach out, please connect, please ask them, and please post them under this video. Like, even if you just have a question for a new video you want to see, like, we really, really want to do some justice here and help people get to the bottom of these things and create healthy relationship dynamics again. Is so important. So thank you so much for watching. Please like our channel, subscribe, share, and please feel free to visit www.personaldevelopmentschool for any more information you're looking to find. Thank you.